Ready to rock and roll? Cool. All right, y'all, first off, I want to thank everyone for being here. It's the first time you're hearing me speak. Excited to be here in this round. Megan is truly one of my favorite people on the circuit. The topic today is vinyl chloride should be banned. First thing I'm going to do on the side of the affirmation is go ahead and explain today's resolution, provide some definitions, make sure we're on the same page. Today we're talking about vinyl chloride. This is defined to us essentially as a colorless gas that burns easily. It's not naturally occurring, and it primarily is used to make polyvinyl chloride, or PVC. This is the type of plastic really used for things like wires, packaging, etc. I'm sure we'll talk about that through the round. We're going to be talking about an advantageous action, essentially where the meat and potatoes of today's debate will lie. And B, ban, I'll be offering a specific plan, but essentially I'm telling you that the EPA should ban the plastic here in the United States. With that today, we're going to use a weighing mechanism of a cost-benefit analysis. Since we're looking at a plan, Judge, I'm asking you to weigh the costs of doing this plan, the benefits of it, and whichever side weighs heavier should get your ballot in today's round. The first thing we're going to do on the side of the affirmation is offer you our contention number one, the problem. The problem. Subpoint A is going to be health. Health. And Judge, what we need to understand is that polyvinyl chloride, or vinyl chloride even by itself, is detrimental and harmful to human health. And the EPA, their essential mission, right, is to protect health of citizens here in the United States. But PVC is actually incredibly detrimental. This isn't just me, but this comes to us from the EPA itself. The EPA on their website talks about how if in an entire lifetime you have 2 ppb, or particles per byte, of vinyl chloride, that gives you a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting cancer in your lifetime, Judge. Again, 2 ppb of that in your entire lifetime, that brings your odds to a 1 in 10,000 chance. What we need to understand is this chemical is something that's actually very easy to consume and be around. When we are taking a shower or drinking water, when we are buying water bottles, things of that nature, they have all had this chemical exposed to them as it continues to seep into those products and harm our health in the long term. But again, not just me, Judge. This comes to us from Harvard in December 2019, as well as a study they did in January of 2022, where they talk about how even when PVC is done right, it leaks into food and beverages on contact. We can have it exposed to us when we do things like microwave a frozen dinner, or even microwave our leftovers in a plastic container. Consistently, it has been linked in studies to health problems, including metabolic disorders, as well as reduced fertility, among a number of other things, again, like that risk to health. Let's look at my second subpoint C here, or subpoint B, which is going to be environmental harms. Environmental harms. So again, the EPA cares about 2 things, the human health and the health of the environment. When we look at how this chemical actually interacts with our environment, we know it's incredibly toxic. This is why, in fact, the EU, the European Union, decided that they should ban VC as well as PVC in 2022. They did this because of the environmental protesters and consequences that they've seen actually happen in their world. This is something that the EPA should care about and should actually model after. We know that the EPA standards for a lot of things simply are not as high as they ought to be, which is why they need to make this change now, and so they actually prioritize and care about the health of the American citizens as well as the American land. Let's go to my second contention, which is the plan. And Judge, here essentially I'm explaining to you why it needs to be the EPA as our actor and how this decision will be beneficial. The EPA should, again, their mission about why they would ban anything, the chemicals they do, is to protect human health, and protect the environment. When we look at Yale Medicine, as well as a professional named Andrew Hong, who's a doctor, he talks about the EPA measures currently are too generalized. They need to ban this product now. And that again is just because they have the evidence. They know that this is a harmful chemical, but they haven't updated a lot of their policies since the 1970s. Judge, that is why I'm saying today is the day to make this action, because we have the ability to protect a lot of people from really dangerous harms, as well as incentivize positive change. Let's talk about that in my third contention, which is the benefits. The benefits. Judge, here what I'm doing is letting you know all the benefits that we are going to see by making this decision. Subpoint A is again going to be health. Health. We know that if we're not using this chemical, there are healthier alternatives. One example of that is going to be PETG. This is something that the same sources talk about how it is actually food safe, it does not have harmful fumes, and is much less toxic to use, but still accomplishes the same goals. We see the same thing supported by Rochester Institute of Technology, where they talk about how PEGT is able to provide an alternative that is safe for human consumption, or not necessarily consumption, but being around or being near that. Subpoint B there again is going to be the environment. The environment, we know that there are better environmental opportunities. Greenpeace talks about this, again, including the PEGT, as well as talking about glass, ceramics, linoleum, and plenty of other alternatives that can rise that already exist without us having to create new technology. But Judge, this is where it gets really interesting. I want to introduce subpoint C, which is supporting the market. Supporting the market. When the EPA steps out and bans this chemical, we know that we can support then maybe an inventive and ingenuity with different types of chemicals that don't exist yet. reducing less toxic waste, supporting clean energy and clean products. Thank you.
All right. Judge, are you ready? Lindsay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Let's take a look at cigarettes. Do those generally cause health harms?
So there's actually, in the production of cigarettes with tobacco, there actually is exposure to PVC in that. There are health harms that come from multiple aspects, yeah.
But have we banned cigarettes?
So on the cigarette boxes, we have huge labels that let people know the risks that exist. There's some level of regulation done. The difference is the way PVC is used, there's not a way to advertise that to people where they would be able to be aware, let alone informed and aware enough to actually combat the exposure.
Let's talk about regulation. Is the problem that there's not regulation or that regulation is not being enforced?
I would say that it's two-pronged, right? There are certain levels of regulation that exist currently, but no matter what you do, like the analysis again from Yale tells us, is that even when it's done right, following regulations, we cannot avoid the exposure to our groundwater, for example.
And are you aware that there are also studies that say the exact opposite, that there is no exposure from things like PVC pipes and water?
Right, so the analysis that I'm giving again is looking at this problem generally holistically. I'm sure individual studies exist that may say in this case there wasn't a harm, but when we look at the chemicals and the way that they have these long-term effects, the evidence seems to be pretty strong that it's harmful.
In general, when you drove your car here today, are there risks to driving a several thousand-pound vehicle?
Sure.
So should we ban driving just because there
The
are
difference
risks?
is I'm consenting to those risks. When it comes to plastics, I don't get to choose how my materials are made. This is especially true for low-income individuals that have to use more plastic over glass or things of other nature. They don't get the luxury to make a choice about what chemicals are being used and not. It's the EPA's job to protect them.
Are you aware that there are actually specific benefits to PVC that actually help the environment?
I would disagree with that, but I'd be very interested to see what you have to say.
Okay, so again, we're looking at cost-benefit analysis. If the benefits outweigh the cost, then this should be a resolution for the negative, right?
Yeah, vice versa.
All right, and just really briefly, as the affirmative, you need to prove the resolution exactly as it's written. Vinyl chloride should be banned. No other alternative is an option here.
I mean, I prove the resolution, yes, under the context of the weighing mechanism and things of that nature, yeah.
Thank you. All right, Lindsay, you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Judge, let's get into it then. Good morning, everyone. I'm so thankful you could all be here. Really excited to debate Lindsay. It's always a fun time. With that, let's jump into the case. I'm going to look first at the affirmatives case, and then I'm going to give you some off-case points of my own. So first off, we hear from the affirmative things about the problem. We hear a lot about health, and Lindsay has done a great job supporting this contention with some evidence. The fact that this is a carcinogen, that it's easy to come by and be around, that there's studies that show that this is leaking around us. But on the flip side, there are also millions of studies from the people who make PVC pipes trying to make sure that this is actually something good that show the exact opposite, that it's not leaking into the environment. Again, like 10 million studies showing that this isn't happening. So when we look at this, the evidence shows one thing, the evidence shows another. If this cannot be proven, then that does not flow to the affirmative. Next up, we see the idea that this causes harms to the environment, that it's toxic. And really here, when we look at vinyl chloride, when it is burned, yes, it is toxic. But if it is properly regulated, if it is properly handled, it's not toxic and it's a great material. That's why we use it in so many things. So the problem here is not just the existence of vinyl chloride. The problem is the lack of regulation. If we can fix that regulation, we can still have all the benefits that we'll talk about in the neg case while solving the AF problem. Next, we see the idea of the plan. We hear that it's EPA's mission to protect health and the environment, basically that their guidelines are too generalized. Well, again, sure, maybe the EPA needs to take some action. Maybe they need to actually enforce these regulations that they've created. But that action is so much more beneficial than completely banning this material because of how widespread the use is. And again, we'll have more about that in the negatives case. But the plan here should not be to completely ban it because, again, let's go back to the cross-examination. There are a lot of things that we use on a daily basis that are also very dangerous. Driving a car, that has a significant health risk. Smoking cigarettes health risk, environment risk. But these things are not banned, so why are we going to ban vinyl chloride? Next, we hear the benefits, and one is that the health, that there's other alternatives. Well, when we look to the studies, we don't need another alternative because the studies show that it's not leaking. And again, this has a lot of specific benefits above these alternatives, and there's no need to switch to an alternative. There's no need to ban something when what we have is already working. We also see the idea of the environment, that again, there is more alternatives, glass, ceramics, linoleum. What we see when we look at a lot of these materials is that they aren't as beneficial as PVC. PVC is durable, it's long lasting, it protects from breaking down. There are all sorts of benefits that we don't see, again, in these alternatives. That's why we use PVC, because it's great at what it does. And finally, we see that we are helping the market because we're increasing innovation. Well, inventors can still think of better alternatives. Innovation can still happen without completely banning this. So this benefit doesn't directly support the resolution here. So with that, let's look at some benefits to vinyl chloride, which is the first point for the negative today. Benefits of vinyl chloride. Now the first is looking at the environment. So according to chemicalsafetyfacts.org, it helps conserve energy and water because it's leak-free. Again, we're talking about leaks, this is leak-free, especially when we look at alternatives for piping in our houses. Lead, copper, these have problems, iron, they leak, they corrode, they rust, they contaminate our water. We don't see this with PVC. It's durable, it's long-lasting, it doesn't leak. It also leads to lower greenhouse gas emissions. So again, we use it because it helps our environment. Subpoint B here is that it's the medical field. PVC is actually widely used in the medical field, which I didn't know before now. It's pretty interesting. We use it in things like blood bags, things like IV bags. The plastic there is used because it's impermeable to germs, it's easily cleaned, and it's great for single-use applications. Now, we just left a global pandemic. We just saw how good it is to have materials that are impermeable to germs. We can't just throw this out when what it is working, and it's a great use for us. And the third subpoint for benefits here is the durability. Now, this is fire resistant, it's leak resistant, it's durable, it lasts a long time, and that's why we have such a widespread use. PVC pipes all around our houses, vinyl flooring, so many construction uses. Imagine what would happen if we didn't have this. And so the second contention here is that we need to regulate, not replace. Regulate, not replace. And if we look at 2022, the EPA actually just increased regulations on vinyl chloride recently. Now we see problems, and that's why that this is a whole topic today, but the problem is not in the regulation, the problem is in the lack of enforcement. So we get all the benefits without all the harms if we simply enforce the regulations that are already there to begin with. And the third contention today is that of feasibility. I talked about widespread use. PVC pipes, basically all the pipes in modern buildings, vinyl flooring, all the medical applications. How feasible is it going to be to get rid of all of this? How are we going to affirm the plan today? How are we just going to completely use alternatives that aren't as researched, that aren't widely used? And again, why would we when what we have works? And when, again, there are more dangerous things that we have not yet banned. So when we really analyze the problem here, there is not a clear case for the affirmative here. We need to regulate, not ban.
But some questions of clarification for you real quick. Starting off, what is the EPA's responsibility?
Again, like you brought up, it's to protect health and the environment, but what we see is PVC actually does a lot to protect health and the environment. So
we'll go into that analysis in a minute, but you said there are like tens of thousands of studies that show there's no harm. Can you tell me where that comes from? Who says there's so much overwhelming research to protect it?
Again, the people creating this are trying to make sure that they're creating it well,
right.
So they've
Are
done
the people that create the product not incentivized to make it sound good?
I mean, you could say that if you're looking in a cynical worldview, but you could also say that they're incentivized to do a good job.
How do objective studies view it? So people that aren't making it, aren't profiting from it, do they say it's harmful or do they say it's good?
Well, that's kind of the point here. There are objective studies that say things on both sides. So if the studies go both ways...
The studies you're talking about, like you explicitly said twice, are coming from those who create the product. What do the studies that are not from people who make the product say?
Some of the studies say one thing, some of the studies say the other. That doesn't mean every single objective study is only saying one thing.
Okay, so you talk as well about how regulation could be an answer here. Who would enforce this?
The people who are currently supposed to be enforcing it, which EPA is one. Again,
how does the EPA, what does that enforcement process look like is really the question.
Well, the problem with vinyl chloride is not in the production, it's not in the use of it. The problem is when it's spilled, basically, when it's not contained. So the regulation and enforcement looks like containing it correctly, just like the regulations say.
Okay.
The enforcement is just not there, as is so many other things in our environment right now.
Okay. All right, thank you, Megan. Judge as well? Alright, let's get kicking. Alright, y'all, this is a really fun 3-minute speech, so I might go a little bit fast, but I'm really going to try to hit some of the big points in today's round. The topic again is vinyl chloride should be banned. Let's remind ourselves of the context of today's conversation. We are not just talking about whether or not it is good or bad, but we are looking at a specific action that the EPA ought to take, right? So let's remind ourselves first and foremost of my second contention, which again talks to us about the plan and the EPA's responsibility. Megan and I agree that the EPA has a responsibility to protect an individual's health as well as the environmental factors. At the end of today, essentially, Judge, you're going to be weighing whether or not you think that's going to be best done through a ban or through regulation. We'll talk about that by starting with her case. Her first contention again here talks about the benefits of vinyl chloride. First thing that she really says is, well, we use it for a lot, so it's going to be hard. But Judge, let's remind ourselves of my third contention. Here I talk to you specifically about alternatives that are feasible to replace the ways that this is currently being used. She tried to disregard my third contention, but Judge, I ask you to not let her do that. Because essentially the fact that we do have these alternatives, like linoleum, for example, that is as durable, that is as useful, tells us that it's not going to be as hard of a switch as she tells us it will be. But even if that was true, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. Now, she specifically relies on the idea of durability a lot, Judge, that it's not going to leak. But let's remind what's actually happening, Judge. When we have water transferring through these pipes that are made with VC, they are absorbing chemicals from the VC, which are going to come hurt our health. So yes, it might not be breaking down, but in that process, it is providing toxins to our body and to our health. But let's remind us, it's not just us that say this, not just Harvard, it's not just Yale, but it's the EPA themselves. As the EPA knows that if you have over 2 ppb of PVC or VC in your entire lifetime, your risk for cancer goes significantly up, and the majority of us are exposed to far more than that, right? When we know that it comes in our drinking water, when we know that that risk is everywhere, we have to care about it. Even if we don't, the EPA sure as heck better when that is their job and they acknowledge the harm. Next here, she talks about how the medical field has impermeable to germs, but Judge, again, we know that there are other alternatives, and again, we can incentivize the creation of even better ones. Secondly, she talks about regulate, not ban, but again, Judge, I asked who and how. We have no reason to believe that just because we say the EPA should regulate better, that they will. We know the EPA isn't great at regulating things to begin with, but at least if there's a ban, then there's some level of consequence for businesses that choose to use this. The difference between regulating things like driving versus banning chemical substance is the consent, Judge. We have to be able to consent to the struggles of what we're participating in. Ultimately, we do not get a choice whether or not we have PVC in our plastic microwavable dish or not. It is there, and it's the EPA's job to make sure that those chemicals, those byproducts, they're in our groundwater, in our drinking water, and again, not just with spills, but as it travels through those pipes, that it's not going to be harmful. Third, feasibility, Judge, cross-apply that to my third argument. Just because it's hard doesn't mean don't do it. Looking at my case uniquely, Judge, we had a lot of overlap there, but essentially she talks about regulation being better. We don't need the alternative, she says, but Judge, we already know that there are beneficial alternatives. She doesn't tell us any sources, any evidence why this is unique and why this is there as the only form of benefits. Judge, we know that we get these benefits from other products without having the harms. Thank you.
Judge, you ready? Let's get into it then. I'm really thankful for all of you for being here once again. I'm really excited to be here. With that, this is my last time I get to speak today, so let's jump into the details. First, I'm going to look at the affirmative case again, then I'm going to look at my case, and then I'll leave you with some reasons why you should feel comfortable voting for the negative. So let's look again at this problem. We here hear the environment. We hear that there are a lot of studies that support this. But I want to remind you, Judge, that there are also studies that say that this problem isn't actually a problem, that the leaking isn't happening. And if we look at the widespread use of this, we use it in so many things because of its unique benefits. And I want to briefly touch on alternatives. I'll touch that again later. We hear that, well, we have these alternatives that are just as good, but really that evidence isn't supported in the affirmative's case. What we get from the affirmative is a list of alternatives, not any unique benefits, not how they're better, not how they solve, not how they're as durable, just that they're there. So be really careful when if you choose to vote on an alternative when we have no support for how that alternative is going to be just as good as PVC. And now let's look at the environment. The problem here with the environment is that it's toxic. But again, Judge, it's only toxic when it's not handled correctly. So if we fix the problem, then we can still have all the benefits without the harms. And that's the weighing mechanism for today, Judge. Benefits and harms. The way to have the most benefits with the least harms is to do what the neg is stating. So looking again at the plan, the EPA mission is to protect the health in the environment, that it's too generalized, that we need to ban things. Basically what the affirmative is telling you here is that EPA just needs to step up to look stronger, and that's why they need to ban this. But again, I want to remind you of all the other things that are just as harmful or more that we have not banned. Why this when there are so many benefits? And the answer is there's not a good reason. That's what the negative case shows you today. There are benefits uniquely to PVC. That's why we need to keep it. Then we go to the third contention, which are the benefits. And really here, when we're looking at benefits, we're not looking at benefits, we're looking at alternatives. And again, just a list of alternatives. We hear PETG, we hear it's food safe, there's no harmful fumes, but again, the same exact thing can be said for PVC. We hear that in the environment, for the environment, we can use glass, ceramics, linoleum, but these are not as durable. We hear that linoleum might be as durable, but Lindsay said this in her last speech without any support saying that it's actually as durable. It's just something that was stated. And then we also hear that there will be an increase in innovation. And I want to remind you, Judge, that can happen without this ban. All these benefits, there still can be alternatives. We still can use that. But we can also keep using all of the benefits in the negatives case as well. So when we're looking at benefits versus harms, the side today that offers you the most benefits is the negative. Let's look briefly at my case. The first is the benefits of vinyl chloride. Now, I want to remind you here, not just of use in houses and construction, but also in the medical field. And Lindsay in her last speech touched on the fact that there are other alternatives. But the studies show from the chemicalsafety.org, where all of this information came from, that these alternatives are not as effective. That's why PVC is used. That's why it's beneficial. Sure, there are other alternatives, but they're not doing the job as well. And again, the impact here, Judge, is that we need it to be more impactful. We just went through a global pandemic. We need materials that are impermeable to germs. We need water pipes that are impermeable to germs. That's why we use PVC. Second, we see the idea, regulate, not replace. This round boils a lot down to solvency. Which side is going to solve the problem? Regulating and enforcing the regulations that are already there solves for all of the problems without having the unique harm of not using PVC. And that's even more important because of the third contention, which is the feasibility. It's going to be extremely difficult to do this because of the widespread use. And we hear from the affirmative, well, just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But the reason why we shouldn't do it is that there's not enough reason to do it. So the first voter for you, Judge, is going to be that cost-benefit analysis. The side that most clearly lays out the most benefits and the least harms is the negation today. And the second voter is going to be solvency. Which side actually solves for the problem? What would solve for the problem is just handling the chemical correctly to begin with. And that is the negatives case today, not the affirmatives. So when we're boiling down all the issues today, Judge, the side that you should prefer is the negative. With that, I like to stand down and I look forward to my opponent's last speech.
Everybody ready to rock and roll? Cool. All right, y'all, it's the last speech of the round, so thank you guys for being here. Topic again is vinyl chloride should be banned. Judge, let's remind ourselves again in the context of today's round. We are specifically looking at what an advantageous action by the EPA would be. Megan put it very well in her last speech. You're really deciding between a ban or regulation. We're going to go over that today in a couple points. What I'm going to do is essentially ask the big questions in the room, and then we'll go over some voters or reasons to sign your ballot to the affirmation. Judge, the first question that might be on your mind is there even a problem, right? When we look at VC, what is the problem? And of course, it is toxic, Judge. Let's remind ourselves of cross-examination. I asked Megan multiple times, well, who says it's not toxic? She says it's the people that make the product. Let's remind ourselves of the incentive that these individuals have. If you are the one profiting from the product, you want to incentivize and make sure that these studies say that your product looks good. You're going to ask specific questions to skew it that way. What Megan didn't contend with today is the actual analysis, meta-analysis that we see provided by Harvard and Yale that talk to us about the harmful chemicals. But even more than that, the EPA themselves tells us about how toxic even just 2 ppb of VC in a lifetime, in an entire lifetime could be. This is something that throughout both of Megan's speeches, she simply did not address, and that's for a reason, Judge. It's because even the EPA knows that this is bad. We know that regulation doesn't work, which is the second question, right? Is regulation enough? And the fact is, Judge, it simply is not. I pointed this out a couple times again. What is the difference between a risk driving your car and a risk microwaving your food? Ultimately, individual citizens like you and I don't have a choice whether or not to consent into exposure to VC, like we do have the ability to consent whether or not to step into a vehicle. This matters. It's the EPA's job to step in and actually protect us from this chemical that they themselves recognize as harmful. Let's also remember that the EU actually banned this chemical in April last year. When we see that the global trend is in this direction, maybe we should trust what the science says just instead of what the producers of the chemical itself have to say. The third real question, Judge, that might be on your mind is why ban if there are benefits? Well, Judge, what are the benefits that my opponent talked to you about? She talks to you about durability, but she doesn't address the analysis that I gave, right? Ultimately, even if the pipe stands, while the pipe is there and your water's coming through it, harmful toxic chemicals are getting into the water that are going to cost you your health in the long term. Analysis provided again by Greenpeace as well as the Rochester Institute of Technology talked to us specifically about how other chemicals would provide a comparable good replacement, specifically PEGT. This is something that wouldn't provide the same type of harm, same types of health consequences, and can fill similar roles. But additionally, the affirmative case talks about the increasing of investment in different markets. Judge, this matters. She says multiple times this could happen anyway, but Judge, we know that it has to happen in this world, and that is a unique benefit to the affirmation. When we no longer have this harmful chemical, something has to rise up and fill that void. I'm going to offer you voters now, or the reasons I want you to sign your ballot to the side of the affirmation. The first voter is going to be the cost of the affirmative plans, right? That's our weighing mechanism, cost-benefit analysis. The only harm to what I've said that my opponents really pointed out is, well, they have to replace it and it'll be difficult. But Judge, just because something's hard, even if it is hard, doesn't mean don't do it. Again, let's remind ourselves, even when it's applied correctly, it doesn't work. Thank you. Those 3-minute speeches go so dang fast.
They do.
So dang fast. Great. Thank you. And does our judge shake hands?